Welcome to the Strong Life Coach podcast, where we speak life, coach life, write life, and lead life. Today, we're joined in the podcast studio by special guest, Hervé Fleurant. Hervé, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a joy to be here.
All right. I'm pumped and excited about what we're talking about today. We're talking about international influence. I know I get a great joy from being around you. I tell my wife, Hervé's one of those people, he just overflows with compassion. He overflows with joy. He overflows with peace. That's just part of your brand and who you are.
Well, thank you. That's very kind of you to say that. And I really do appreciate that. Thank you.
Awesome. So I want to make sure people tuning in know who you are. So I'm going to go over your biography real quick. If I miss anything or if I make a mistake, feel free to jump in and correct me. I'm completely good with that.
Very good.
So you received your education from UMass Boston with international relations.
That's correct.
You've had 31 years in full-time ministry across France, Egypt, Haiti, Cotoiva, Kenya, the United States, and South Africa.
That is correct.
7 different countries. Impressive. Okay. You've been married for 28 years.
That's right.
Also impressive. You speak 4 different languages, English, Spanish, French, Haitian, and Haitian Creole.
That's right.
And then regarding your international influence right now, you have experience building organizations into the thousands in distant countries, with Cotoiva helping to build that organization and lead it from 20 members to 1,250 members, and which now in Abidjan, that's 2,200 members.
That's correct.
As far as the size of the organization, which is, the more I read, as far as even the languages, the more I'm realizing how exclusive company I'm sitting in right now. Because it's one thing to know 4 languages, but then it's to build an organization to the hundreds. It would be awesome. From 20 to hundreds, but from 20 to 1,000, it's incredibly impressive.
Oh, thank you.
Then you have from Kenya. You began leading that organization when it was 800 members, and then by the time you were leaving that organization, it was 1,350.
That's correct.
And currently, you oversee about 50 different organizations across the globe.
That is true.
So quite the man that's in front of me right now. Again, thank you for joining me. I'm excited to learn from you.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
So let's go back to those languages. So tell me, how did you learn those 4 languages?
Well, I grew up partly in Europe. I went there when I was 10 years old. I went to France and then moved to Spain. I went to medical school in Europe.
Wow.
And so she began in France, finished in Spain. And so that's why I speak those 2 languages. And then Haitian Creole is spoken in Haiti. And I learned that there when I was serving there. And of course, English is my native tongue.
Yes. Okay. So when we're talking about international influence, it's almost like you were built and designed to do this. And maybe we'll get into that with this next question, which is, how did you decide to study international relations in college?
Well, by the time I was 20 years old, we were leaving Europe, and I was coming back to the States, and I'd studied linguistics while I was there, and in Spain, and I had seen that many people in Europe did not know who we were as Americans. I had a run-in with one of my professors, and as we was getting to know our class, it was a class of about 300, and he noticed I was an American. And he said, okay, well, he had me stand up in front of everyone and said, hey, what do you think of the United States? And I said, well, I think it's a great country. And when he cut me off, he said, no, well, and at the time, President Reagan was our president. And he was saying, well, I think Reagan is terrible and this, that, and the other. So I cut him back off. And I said, sir, you didn't ask me about our president. You asked me about the United States.
Wow.
And that's the answer I gave. And he liked the answer. And we actually became very good friends. And I realized people don't know who we are. They only know what's portrayed out there on the political level, but they don't know who the people are. And so I wanted to serve in a way that people would understand who Americans are as a people.
Wow. It's a powerful principle because we could easily judge from the label,
Exactly.
on the outside as people. I mean, forget international, even like local, we can be like, okay, well, I know this person, I know where they work, or I know what they do, or I know their education, or I know, I see their grass outside for our neighbors, right?
Right.
You could just have this label you put on people instead of actually getting to know underneath and pulling back the layers of who these people really are. So I appreciate your vision for wanting to be that type of, ambassador, if you will.
Well, thank you. And that is really it's human nature. I think. It's human nature to look at people and just judge them on the surface. And so I didn't know what I was going to do with all those languages, but I knew that God had given me that ability for a reason. So I said, well, let me go ahead and use it in the socio-political realm.
Yes.
And then, of course, God changed that plan pretty quick.
Yes. What I hear is you were discerning God's calling for your life.
I was.
Why have I learned these languages? Why do I have this international experience? Why did he give me the parents that I have? Why did he give me the experience that I had in growing up? And then in this insight and this expertise with languages, and in taking that and going, all right, well, if I've learned all of this, how can I use it?
That's it.
To serve people and help organizations.
Exactly.
I love hearing this idea of calling. I think we can all relate to that, because if we look for that almost that divine lace around our lives, we look for it and we pinpoint it, it could help lead us in the right direction as far as what we're supposed to be doing with our lives.
I firmly believe that. I firmly believe that God designs us with a purpose in mind, and that we are to leave this planet a little bit better than when we found it.
Yes.
And so that's
yes. You remind me of this Mark Twain quote. It goes, the two most important days of your life are the day you were born and the day you found out why. And it speaks to us about knowing our calling, our purpose. Why am I here? Why have these things happened in my life?
Exactly.
And if everything has a purpose, then maybe I could use it in a way to serve and help other people.
Exactly.
So when it comes to building organizations internationally, what inspired you to invest and build these organizations in this way?
Well, as I was studying international relations, I noticed that all the different ideologies looked fantastic on paper. But as soon as you add the human element, everything fell apart.
Wow.
And so I realized that the problem is not our ideas. The problem is us.
Wow.
And so that's when I changed course and wanted to go into ministry. Because I figured if I'm going to have any type of lasting impact, I want to help people really. It's the individual that needs to be helped. It's not their ideas that need to change. It's me and it's the other person.
Yes.
And if I can help someone change, then that person will then go ahead and influence others, and then others, and then others.
Yes.
And that was why.
Yes. And it speaks to me because every organization has incredible values.
True.
I've never looked at an organization's values and go, oh, like, wow, they value something. Like no organization values dishonesty, right?
Exactly.
Or cowardice,
right?
Or, pick a vice. And we don't have core values for organizations that we share publicly of going, hey, we don't share vices. We all have like these values that are good. Everybody goes, oh, that's a good value. That's a good value.
True.
Because that's the paper, to your point. But then when you pull back the layers and where organizations get into trouble, it's not because their values weren't in line, weren't listed.
Right.
It's because the people didn't live up to those values, to your point.
Exactly. And so that is what made me change course. And it's been a privilege. It's been a joy watching people change. It's been painful at the time as well, because not everyone does change. And we all make mistakes, but that's part of being human on this planet.
Yes. We probably could do a whole podcast on pain. So
we could.
We have to bring you back for that one.
So be it. Very good.
And those words came out of my mouth before I was thinking about the surgeries and all of that. I know Angelina and I teased that if we hear a story from Hervé and we're talking about injuries, we might be on various continents and going through various travels. So you take over the river and through the woods to another height.
Well, look, pain teaches us incredible lessons if we allow it to. And I think it can make us better. And I think it does make us better. But then again, we have to submit ourselves to the pain. So, but again, that is a whole nother conversation.
Right. It is. I love it though. I love it. But to come back to the whole thing of, suffering produces perseverance, character, hope. So we had to come back to just do that one.
That's right.
How would you say local influence differs from international influence? Because you lead here in San Antonio, Texas, locally, but you still carry on international influence for countries around the world. How do those areas differ, if they do?
They do differ. Let me start with the similarity first.
Okay.
What is similar is, in order to do both, you have to have strong relationships. And so by God's grace, I one of my strengths is relationships. And so
Yes.
I try to lead as relationally as possible here.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I'm able to still serve internationally is because of the relationships that God has blessed me with all those people.
Mm-hmm.
So when we talk and when we converse remotely, whether it be via phone or via Skype or something of that nature, there's a relationship that's already there and there's a trust that's there.
Yes.
And so as we talk, we're able to really help each other and encourage each other and influence each other through that relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And here locally, that's the same. Now, of course, what does differ is, over the phone, if it's just a phone call, you can't see an eye movement. You cannot see a facial expression. You have to listen for those types of things.
Sure.
And, but you can't see those things. Locally, I can sit down with somebody, we can have coffee. And then if someone, is hurting or needs encouragement, and I can pick it up more readily and more quickly.
Yes.
So, that's one of obviously the main difference. Distance is one of the main differences, I would say.
I love how you talked about relationships, because when you think about relationships are an area of influence that allows you to influence without the title,
Indeed.
without the role, because in some ways these international groups, they don't have to have your influence.
They do not.
They don't have to. Okay, well,
No.
It's in some organizations, I've been in organizations where I've been a remote leader or I've been led in a remote manner. And in that position, my remote leader could fire me. So I really did, in some ways, I was forced to, to be influenced by their guidance or what their instructions were. But in your area, people don't have to be influenced by you.
No, they do not. They do not. It's a good point you bring up. And no, they do not. Matter of fact, I ask them pretty regularly, would you like to be influenced by someone else? Would you like someone else to take my spot? Is there someone else who is better right now? Is someone else perhaps that you feel closer to that could help you better than I can at this time? And I asked that question. And so far, the answer has been no, we want you, which is both encouraging,
sure.
But then it's a huge responsibility at the same time.
Right.
So,
and you hit this great point right there, which was, I feel like you put ego aside, because even as men, or maybe even as people, we just like being needed. Oh, that's a stroke to my ego. It feels good. I'm encouraged. Like this person needs me from on the other side of the planet, from across the Atlantic. They need me. But to have the sobriety in mind, or have the humility to go, what if they've thought about someone who's better equipped or in better position to be able to add value to them, but having the humility to go, maybe it's not me.
Exactly. Well, listen, I've been doing this a long time now. And so there's a point in time where ego has got to go, because it's an obstacle. It's a hindrance. That's a better word. It's a hindrance. And I don't want anything to hinder their growth. I don't want anything to hinder where God wants to take them.
Yes.
And I do not want to be in the way. I'm human. I'm a sinner. I have so many faults, and I don't want to be an obstacle or a hindrance to them. And so when you care about people and you want the best for them, ego has no place.
Wow. Hey, that's a quote right there. And this, I always tell people when they're on the show, I got a chance to go back and listen to every single word and sentence spoken, and I add to my files. So you're giving me some great content for my files for quotes, but ego has no place when it comes to helping others to reach their potentials. There's something I took away from you right now. You also said something else about, how did you word it? You mentioned ego. I don't want anything to hinder their growth.
Right.
And I think if we just have that mentality with each other, or again, any leaders tuning in, if every single leader who's overseeing a staff or is overseeing a group just had the conviction or had this core belief of, I want all the people that are influenced by me to not be hindered in their growth. How beautiful that would be.
It would be. And this is something that my wife and I, we have deep convictions about, and we've learned this. Listen, if you love people, then this is the obvious conclusion. So it's been a privilege to serve them. It is always a privilege to serve, and until the Lord chooses someone else, and that's the way it should be.
I love it. Love those principles. Now, let's talk about mistakes. What mistakes have you made internationally that have shaped you as a leader?
One of the mistakes that I've made is not becoming all things to all men all the time. That idea of becoming all things to all men is something that the Apostle Paul espoused. And you see that in the scriptures. But it's critical if you're going to be working internationally. You have to become like them.
Wow.
You cannot expect them to become like you.
Wow.
I'll give you an example. In the Cotoiva, one of the tenets of hospitality is when people come to your home, you offer them something to eat, and that is good and right. Well, I started noticing that certain people would come to the house around lunchtime all the time, and so in my American mindset, I'm thinking, are these people just taking advantage of me for a meal? I mean, what is this? And so there was a period where I stopped welcoming people around lunchtime. And then a brother in the church, a dear brother, he came over. He was an older brother, and he was trying to explain this to me. And I began to defend my position.
Uh-oh.
And then my wife, in her great wisdom, gently tapped my leg and said, "Can I talk to you for a second?" And we went to another room, and she said, "Listen, he's trying to talk to you about something that's really important, and you need to listen to what he's saying." And I realized that he was explaining something that was culturally important.
Wow.
And I was being stubborn and sticking to my American way of thinking. And it was hindering my relationships in the church. And so I listened to my wife. I went back out. I apologized, and we talked. And he was very gracious with me, but it was good. I needed to hear what he had to say. And so sometimes we can let our culture, our own the way we do things in our own country, hinder us from being what the people need wherever we are. So.
Yes. I love the principle of one, thank you for your vulnerability and sharing that story. I think we can all attest of how valuable and how insightful our wives are. I think that's, again, potentially other podcasts.
Yeah, absolutely.
But
yes, indeed.
We joke in like premarital counseling, but we say that, okay, remember how much you value your spouse's opinion because they chose you as their spouse. But just to your point, I think you had the humility to go, wait, my wife has some incredible insight, and I'm going to listen to what she has to say. And I'm going to use that in this conversation to really pull down my defenses, as you said, you're feeling, but to listen and adjust in a way that was able to connect with people.
Exactly. And she prevented me from making a huge mistake. I was making the mistake. And she's, so I praise God for her wisdom and her love for me and her courage just to say, listen, stop it.
Yes.
And listen. And, we are to be quick to listen, slow to speak.
That's right.
And slow to become angry. And so that was a great lesson for me.
Now, you use the phrase becoming like them.
Yes.
What tips would you have to a leader out there who's listening and going, either locally or internationally, going some quick ways to become like the people they're leading?
First of all, you have to find out, what do the people love?
Okay.
Whether it be food. Find out what are their favorite foods. What athletic teams do they support? What is important to them in their lives? Learn about those things.
Yes.
When I teach, there's a class that I teach, and part of it talks about becoming all things to all men. And so I talk about, for example, if you go to some place, find out what sports teams do everybody support, and even if it's not a team you support, learn to support those teams with the people, because it's an interesting thing. There's a vulnerability, there's an emotion to that love for that sport and for that team. And if you can join them in that, they really welcome you. And I found that when you connect with people on that level, it helps you stay connected when you need to talk about other things as well.
Yes. And you bring up sports, but people are so passionate about sports. They are. I mean, they're emotionally involved, emotionally invested.
Exactly.
And it's one of those easy areas. And I like how you brought sports and food, right? Those two areas, if we took those two away of what sports, these hobbies that the people that we're leading, what do they have and how can I become a fan of those sports? Even I was thinking about, I was in Ohio a couple of weeks ago and I was like, oh, how much more valuable would it have been if I had some Ohio gear on along the way, right?
Sure.
Just like that small gesture, but showing that I'm a fan versus going over there. Sometimes, you'll hear a speaker or somebody come in who does the opposite,
right?
And it's like it's not a moment of connection; it's a moment of
that is exactly
disconnection.
Right. And I have seen that so many times. Let's just say, for example, here in Texas, for example, we have people who are super fans of Texas A&M or UT Texas.
Yes.
And when they go to other parts of the country, for example, and they go, and they're cheering the Aggies, but you're in another part of the country.
That's right.
Well, I have seen this with my own eyes.
Right.
I see the body language of the crowd changes because they're not attached to the Aggies. So if sometimes we can come into a situation we're so attached to what we love that we don't connect with people on the level of what they love. And so becoming all things to all men, that's part of it. It's learning what do they love? What are they passionate about? And when they see that what they are passionate about also matters to you, that endears you to them, and now you can begin to have a relationship. And when you need to talk about more important things than sports, now they're more willing to listen. And more apt to listen.
Well, and I think what's valuable about what you described is that core of there are way more important things for sports. So if I go to Ohio and I'm going, well, no, the most important thing are the Spurs. If I said that,
exactly,
then it's like, no. Well, if I'm here to speak and motivate and encourage and equip these people, that's the most important thing.
Right.
Now, how I get there, if I happen to have a Cleveland Cavaliers shirt or a Browns or whatever it is, showing a connection or a mutual interest,
there we go,
then we can have this moment of, hey, well, we're on the same page here.
That's right.
I'm trying to help. The most important thing is equipping you with principles to help your life.
Exactly.
And I just love the principle.
Now, it cannot be forced, nor can it be faked. It has to be genuine. And that is a key to becoming all things to all men. It has to be real. So you're not pretending. You're not doing this. Is not a gimmick to influence people. No. When they see that what you feel is real, now they'll listen. And so that's something I oftentimes stress in talking about this topic.
I like it. So in that context, fake it till you make it. No. But this is about authenticity. Sincerity, where I'm genuinely interested in what you're interested in.
Exactly.
This isn't just, it's simply a tool to use to influence you.
That's right.
No, like this is you and what you care about. I want it to be important to me too. And then again, when we transition it to more important topics, we already have this connection.
Exactly. To put it succinctly, you're telling people you matter because they do.
Yes. You matter because you do. I love it. Now let's segue into we kind of started talking about I want to make sure we revisit it.
Sure.
Is what mistakes have you seen leaders make that have significantly hurt their influence internationally?
I think I've seen leaders hold on to their culture and constantly play up their culture. If you will, there's a reason there's a term, ugly American.
Wow.
There's a reason that term exists. It's because, and I've seen it with my own eyes. When I lived in Spain, I would be with my Spanish friends and I dressed like them. I talk like them. And sometimes I would see some of our American servicemen who I respect greatly. And so when they're on leave, they come into the city and they're just having a great time. But and I could hear them long before I saw them.
Okay.
And it deeply offended all the Spaniards around.
Wow, okay.
The people were offended, but they didn't say anything. But I saw it, and they would tell me, why do your people do this? Why do they behave this way? Why? Because they insisted on being American in somebody else's place.
Wow.
As opposed to, there's nothing wrong with being American, but if you can adopt some of the, even respect some of the culture and the principles of another place, then people are so warm and welcoming. But that's why that term exists, because sometimes, when you come from a culture that perhaps is considered dominant and everybody knows it, their ideas are, they say, well, you don't have to show that all the time. Can you be a little bit like us?
Yes.
And so I've seen leaders now go into other countries and not be successful. And the people put up with them, but don't listen to them simply because they did not, they're always talking about their place instead of adopting where they live. So, and it's a funny thing. It's a difficult thing to teach.
Yes.
It's a difficult thing to understand, to discern, and to teach. But it is vital if you're going to be working internationally.
I can understand how that can happen when it comes to like subtle nuances of boasting, where it's like, where every time I talk about my culture and then I'm elevating it, I'm almost exalting this culture. And especially if it's different from the existing culture, then as a platform, as a leader, you're often given the opportunity to speak, but every time that I'm speaking, I'm showing that this one is superior. And the present one that you're in, I could hear, I could see the concept taking place. If the present culture is inferior and my past culture is superior, and I keep on bringing that up, that comes through. And it may not be like something completely obvious, like, hey, I'm amazing, but it might be my culture is more amazing than your culture. And I could see how that can deteriorate connection with the people. Absolutely.
I'll give you a simple example. It would be like, you're with your current spouse, but you're always talking about that old girlfriend. And how incredible she was. Now, first of all, I don't understand why you would do that in the first place. Right. But that's really what it feels like. And if we can understand that, then internationally, I think we'll be able to, represent, if it's representing the United States, we'll be able to do that better. I think, or if it's working in an organization, I think we'll be able to have a better working relationship with the people that we're with, and they'll accept us, and we'll learn to love them. And when you've got that connection, sky's the limit.
Yes, you remind me of this principle, because there's a nuance of humility when it's personal. I have personal humility, and then there's a nuance of humility when it's collective humility. And we can have what I'm hearing is I can have this personal humility where I won't brag about me, I won't project my strengths or brag about my wisdom, or I won't do those, but collectively I will. And so but then again, it creates that disconnection.
It does.
And which ultimately hinders influence. And if it hinders influence, that's the main role I'm doing as a leader. It's what we're doing as in leadership is you're trying to influence people for the good.
For the good. Absolutely. That's absolutely right.
So let's talk more about what's helped you be successful. So what are keys to success when influencing others remotely?
Well, we've already talked about having the relationship. I think that is absolutely key. I think consistency is important. Being able to consistently talk. I know for me, when I was that leader that was remote, and the one training me was far away. When we would get on the phone, I could get on the phone and be discouraged.
Yes.
And then by the time I'm done having a conversation with him, I feel like I can conquer the world because I've been filled up. I've been encouraged because we had the relationship, but now we've had the talk and the consistency, and he's listened. So listening is an issue as well. It's a very, very important key. He's listened and we've been able to converse, and now I would leave those conversations ready to go and encourage. And so that taught me now that I do the same thing to maintain the relationship, to listen, and to try to be as consistent as possible. So to make sure that remote connection is successful. But my goal is to make sure that he or she, whoever I'm talking to, leaves the conversation with me lifted up, encouraged, and enthused and re-energized to keep on doing what they're doing, or to take what they're doing to a higher level.
How do you, with the number of people you're influencing internationally and remotely, when you use the word consistently, which I think is a great leadership principle, being consistent. How do you manage consistency with the volume of influence that's happening remotely? How do you make that successful?
You have to. I think Jesus had the key. He knew that he couldn't influence the world, just randomly. He chose 12, and so you have to choose who you're going to influence, and allow them now to continue the influence. When I left when Jan and I left Abidjan, they were 1250 in membership. Today they're 2,200. But there are also 34 churches with a combined membership of 4,800.
Wow!
They did that. I didn't do that because we were able to pour ourselves into them, and they do the exact same thing with the leaders that they influence. And so, and that's how you do it. You have to choose very carefully who you're going to influence, and then pour yourself into those people. But you have to choose a few. If you spread yourself too thin, you'll get nowhere.
Choose a few. So, again, probably, one is a rhyme. So that to me, when I hear a rhyme, I'm like, hey, that's a separate podcast. But let's touch it a little bit. Is how do you choose? How do you choose? All right, this is somebody I want to pour into and invest in.
For me, being a minister, obviously, I pray about it. But what I'm looking for in someone is do they care about people? Do people matter to them? Because if people matter to them, then they already have that key ingredient to be able to pour yourself into somebody else. If someone comes up to me and they say, I want to be a leader, I am instantly suspect. And the reason is because, so my first question is always, why do you want to be a leader? Do you want to be a leader because there are a lot of advantages and wonderful things that come with being a leader. But they benefit you. But to be the kind of leader that we're talking about, you have to want to lead so that you can benefit others. And that is what I'm looking for first and foremost in someone. Are you in this for you? Or are you in this for others? If you're in this for others, we can work this. So that's one of the main things that of course, you have to have the ability, the talent to be able to do it. I, personally, from my own experience, because I work internationally, those that are able to and even can speak different languages, that's also important. Because sometimes if you can talk to someone in their own language, it's better for them. It's harder for you, but it's better for them. And so people that understand that and can do that, that's also important.
You hit this, both great points. I think you captured talent and you captured a love for people. And you're thinking about, you talk about the skill, right? So the talent, skill, love for people. And I like how you hit the area of loving people, and I almost asked the question almost behind that, which is just what are you doing now to show that you love people? And to your point, motivation matters, because you could begin, we talk about this principle when it comes to coaching, that's what I do, right? So I coach people individually, and you ask these 5 whys. Yeah. So five whys deep. All right. So why do you want to be a leader? Oh, well, I want to speak in front. Well, why do you want to speak in front? Yeah. Because I want people to clap for me. Why do you want people to clap for you? Oh, because it makes me feel good about myself. Well, why do you want people to feel good about yourself? Because I don't feel good about myself. Well, why don't you feel good about yourself? Well, it's a separate area. Yeah. Now, but to the point, there's times when people don't feel great about you.
True.
Then does that mean your motivation changes as far as influencing people?
Exactly.
And but I love how you're talking about magnifying the motivation and figuring out what is it and why do you want to lead, or why do you want to influence people?
It's critical. It's critical because we only have a certain amount of time on this earth, and which is fine. And if what I'm doing is able to, I can pass that on, and to people who can then pass that on, that is a biblical principle. We're supposed to entrust to reliable men and women, who and then in turn can go and teach others.
Yes.
And that's what we try to do. And so that's why I think those qualities are critical.
Now, what types of cultural clashes have you witnessed in leading internationally? And in leading, how did you navigate those areas?
I'll give you an example. One of the tenets of our organization overseas is that in each country where we are, all the ethnicities, all the tribes are represented in our organization. Well, with each tribe, for example, they have different ways of celebrating weddings.
Oh, okay.
Different ways of celebrating funerals. And so we've sat down with men and women from different tribes in the congregation, in the organization, and sat down and asked, okay, how do your people do weddings?
Wow.
And how do your people do weddings? Because if it's fine if, let's say, a member of this tribe wants to marry someone from that same tribe. Well, there's no problem.
Right.
But we were running into issues when we had someone from this tribe wanting to marry someone from that tribe.
Uh-oh.
Now, there's no issue between them, but their families, because traditionally, you're not just marrying that person, which is a very Western idea. In the rest of the world, oh no, there are hundreds of people that come behind this person, and you're getting married to them too, in a sense. And so you got to understand where everybody's coming from. So we would sit down and ask, okay, well, tell us what is to be done. And so we organized ourselves in such a way that based on whatever tribe the people were, we tried to do our very best to respect each side and then to meld both traditions together. It was kind of a fun thing, and it was new for the families as well, but they really appreciated the respect that we showed their culture, and they understood that we weren't maybe going to do everything that is required in their culture, but the fact that we made the gesture and that we wanted to respect this other person's culture and while respecting this other person's at the same time, the families loved it, appreciated it. And as a matter of fact, many of their family members joined the organization simply because of those types of things.
Wow.
Because of that respect. And so those are some of the culture clashes,
sure,
at a very personal level, with marriages, funerals, these types of things as well.
And were y'all able to pick that up right away, or was it after a little while of seeing, like, did the conflict start? Sometimes you're able to catch it before it does. Sometimes you catch it afterward. Yeah. But what did you notice in?
For us, it was always afterwards.
Okay.
It was always you would come into the situation and then you'd realize, oh, we have a problem. Okay, then you go back and figure out the solution. But then once it was figured out, that solution, now you have that for future relationships. And so, that's and people were always very gracious. But the fact that we would even stop what we were doing to make sure that we were respecting everyone's culture, people really, really appreciated that.
And I think it brings it full circle, because you began talking about this idea of not projecting your culture as the leader onto them, right? But now you're almost taking it up a notch. You're going, well, I'm not going to bring my American wedding traditions and project them here, but also how do I help them to not project and overstep, but in a way that's to find this harmony, if you will, in these pivotal life events.
Right.
That, you know, if there's pictures taken, these are memories that are built forever.
That's right.
And it could be built in a beautiful way.
Right.
Or it could be built in an ugly way, depending on how it's navigated.
It's very, very true. And, you know, we all know that weddings, funerals, these types of things, they're highly emotional events. And they can bring out the best.
Yes.
And they can also bring out the worst. You know, everybody's got an Uncle Joe or Uncle Bob. But, you know, everybody knows that when he shows up, or Aunt Marge going to show up, it's going to get wild. And so when you're in a culturally diverse place, all the more so. So you really gotta learn how to navigate those things.
Yes.
And be very respectful.
Wow. So you have these arenas of navigating, which makes total sense. The marriage ceremonial, wedding celebration, all of this. Then you have the funeral. Is there other areas that, I mean, I imagine men and women, like, is there a need to even learn to navigate customs in those cultures that were different from men and women?
Yes, no doubt. I was teaching a marriage class many years ago. This was in Kenya. And we were talking, I was talking to the men, and I was talking about helping your wife with household chores.
Okay.
And I was talking about doing the dishes. And one brother, you know, came up, and, you know, heads were nodding and in agreement. But there's one brother who came up to me afterwards and said, I'm really struggling with what you said. And I said, why? And he said, I can't help my wife with the chores. Now I'm thinking, why? Are you being selfish? Are you being chauvinistic? What is it?
Sure.
And he said, well, see, when I was a child, up until the age of 5 in our tradition, I could be around my mother. But at the age of 5, I would be beaten if I went into the kitchen.
Wow.
And to teach men their proper place. And in our tradition, men do not do anything in the kitchen. And now, so all this is very new to me and very difficult, because he had been beaten as a child. He was very close to his mother. And so getting him away from his mother was very difficult, but they beat him. And in that tribe, that's what they would do. That was normal for them.
Wow.
So here we are introducing different ideas and on how to have a great marriage. Now, his wife came from a different tradition and was always wondering, why doesn't he help me in the kitchen? And it's something as simple as that. And it was causing issues in their marriage.
Right.
But he had never told her, you know, because he didn't understand why she was asking the question.
Yes.
Because in his tradition, this is very normal. You see, so sometimes we would have that. So it wasn't until that class, and he explained that to me, that I told my wife, and she had told his wife, this is why. And she said, well, he never told me that.
Wow.
Because he never put 2 and 2 together until we had that conversation, or that class was taught.
Yes.
And so there's a lot of things like that we ran into. But, you know, they're great challenges. But we come from the idea that everyone has a great heart and everyone wants to do their best.
That's right.
No one is purposefully trying to be stubborn or purposely trying to hurt the other. Everyone wants to do their best. The issue is oftentimes misunderstanding, even culturally. So,
right. I think about the proverb that says, you know, the first to present their case seems right, and so the other one comes forward, and there's like some cross-examination and some thought process, because right from that first angle that you brought up, the wife, potentially her story was that he never helps in the kitchen. Now he might be going, but I help in all of these other ways. I'm not selfish. I'm not proud. I help in look at all the other ways that I help. So his character potentially was completely fine. But the implementation of the practice was different. The culture was different. So, but I could see how without the insight and discernment from helping them, it could be like, oh, well, you're wrong. Oh, well, you're wrong. Right. But being able to help them to have harmony in these situations.
Absolutely. So here we have a man who had been traumatized as a child and taught, you do not set foot in the kitchen. You know, and taught through trauma that's how it is. So here we are. So so this shift was very traumatic for him.
Yes.
Because he had to deal now with the trauma that was used to teach him to stay out of the kitchen. And so I tell that story to help people understand that there's a lot that goes into the making of a human being.
Yes.
And if you're going to be leading them, you need to do your very best to try to understand all that goes into making this person. And when you do, you'll be a better leader.
Yes. So what about parenting? So again, I'm just thinking about different. So you have wedding, you have the funeral, you have like men and women nuances in that relationship. But what about parenting? How did you see cultural differences there that you had to navigate in supporting?
Yeah, certainly. There are a lot of differences. My goodness, so many. I have been in situations where the culture was matriarchal.
Oh, wow.
And I've been in situations when the culture was patriarchal. And so, obviously the matriarchal cultures, the women are held in very high esteem and the women lead. And then there are other cultures where the men lead. And one in particular, where the father would come home from work, dinner is set on the table. He eats first alone. Okay. And then when he's done, and meaning he's eaten all the best parts of whatever was cooked, then the children, when he is finished, are allowed to come to the table, but he leaves.
Interesting.
And so we were dealing with those types of cultures. So now in our organization, as we're trying to teach family values and togetherness, so we'd have to talk about that and talk about eating together and the family growing together. And it was a very, very, very different thing.
Fascinating.
It was definitely interesting and challenging.
Tell me more about the matriarch. I have to give me something like, what was that like in those cultures and navigating those areas in a way that was honoring and helpful and beneficial to them? Or what was it like?
Well, it was challenging because if you're dealing with people who come from more of a matriarchal society, and even the family name is taken on the mother's side.
Wow.
Okay, and then you're marrying or pairing up with someone from a patriarchal society, and then you have children. Okay, so who what name? Who, what's the name, and how do you navigate that? So it takes a lot of sensitivity, and you cannot come into these conversations assuming that the other is wrong.
Wow.
Or better yet, you cannot come into these conversations assuming that you are right.
Yes.
And so we would have to delicately manage these conversations with children, the naming, on the matriarchal side, things like that. Oh yeah. It was very, very interesting.
Okay, so you and I were talking a few months back.
Yes.
You mentioned this idea. I know we were at that point in time, we were talking about going to Africa together.
Yes.
And you were looking at pictures downstairs, and you were looking at the pictures of me with facial hair.
Yeah.
And I commented that potentially growing my facial hair out for the trip to Africa.
Yes.
And you mentioned this cultural nuance. You were like, actually, it would be best that you did not grow facial hair out for going to Africa. And I think there was a cultural principle there. So speak a little bit about that, what your thoughts were, and so people understanding, because we've covered like nuances with wedding ceremonials. We didn't get deeply into funerals, but we mentioned it. Men and women. We talked about parenting. So talk about something as simplistic as facial hair or appearance.
Very good. Okay. In your case in particular, the reason I brought that up is because when you grew out facial hair, you look Middle Eastern.
Okay.
Which is fine.
Right.
I have many friends that are Middle Eastern. It's beautiful. However, in this day and age, when you're traveling and you have facial hair, they will assume that you might be Muslim. Okay. And you're a young guy traveling. It can cause problems. It can cause extra security screening here and abroad.
Okay.
And because unfortunately we profile people. And so people would look at you and say, oh, is he a young Muslim? What kind of Muslim is he? I have friends that are Muslim. Most Muslims are wonderful people. However, there are some that are perhaps a bit more radical. Even as I have many friends who are white, that they're not part of the KKK. They're radical. You understand what I'm saying? But people don't understand that. And so if they see a young man with with the facial hair, because in some of the tenets of Islam, you have to have that facial hair, and it could put some people, on edge, if you will.
It can be a hindrance to connection.
It can be a hindrance to connection. So when you're traveling overseas, you don't want anything to hinder connection. So
That's
you
right.
want to be as quote unquote non-threatening as possible, so that you can establish connection as quickly as possible.
Yes, not establishing connection as quickly as possible. I love that. And but it speaks to even me in business building here in San Antonio. I mean, when we decided to launch the business back in March, Angelita and I had a conversation about, look, I'm gonna have a clean cut every single week. I'm gonna be shaving every single day. Different from what I was doing when I was in the corporate world, when I had more facial hair.
Sure.
But because we live in a military city, and I would love opportunities to influence those. But this idea of how can I eliminate different hindrances to have this connection and relatability.
That's right.
But even to your point about internationally is I would never have considered that outside of having that conversation with you. You mentioned it, and I was like, oh, that's a great cultural point to consider.
Yeah. Presentation matters.
That's right.
And so I know some people want to rebel against that, and that's fine. But the truth of the matter is, as far as human beings are concerned, we see first and judge before we speak.
Yes.
And sometimes, you may have to go pretty deep into a conversation before your preconceived ideas are changed.
Gotcha. Well, you shared some incredible insight. Thank you so much for sharing the insight, for being present. Before we close, though, I want to make sure I hear about your favorite qualities of each of your family members. So about Janet, your wife, about Daniel, David, Hallie, Sahai, and Sierra.
Okay.
So maybe we'll pick one quality of each. If you happen to say more, you can. But
sure.
But we'll aim for one, and then we'll see what happens.
Aim for one. Well, that's a tough challenge right there, because they all have so many qualities that I love and appreciate in all of them.
Yes.
All right. Let me start first with my wife, Janet. Janet is incredibly godly. She loves God. And loves people very, very deeply. And so I love that quality about her.
Yes.
Then I'll start with my oldest. So we'll go, chronologically here. My oldest, Daniel. Daniel is, he is just fearless.
Yes.
And he relates to people so well. And he may not always realize this, but people follow him. And he's a great young man. I just love him to death. Also, he was born on my birthday, so my firstborn son on my birthday. Then comes my daughter Sahai, and Sahai, she also she is an extraordinary servant. She loves serving people. That's why she's a nurse.
That's right.
But she loves serving people, and she does it beautifully. And then comes my son, David. And David has an extraordinary sense of humor. He is the funniest guy, and it endears him to people. And he just started teaching. He's a sixth grade teacher right now.
Wow.
And one of that Ingram Hills Idea School, and just does a tremendous job. Great young man. His wife, Hallie, I love the fact that she loves David, but Hallie has a quiet strength about her. She's not super loud or anything, but she just has a quiet strength, which I've seen on several occasions. I just respect her greatly. She's a wonderful, wonderful young lady. Then after Hallie comes my youngest now, and that's Sierra, who just turned 17. And Sierra just also has an incredible sense of humor. And Sierra is a very, very loyal friend.
Yes.
So I believe that's everybody.
That's everybody.
That's my whole family there, and I'm very blessed to have them. Very privileged, and I'm very thankful for my family.
Awesome. I love hearing your favorite qualities of your family. It's amazing to do. I'm excited for them to listen to this part of it. Right. I'm excited for them to listen to all of it, but especially hearing positive things about people. I love just being a source. Me throwing the alley-oop to you, you slam dunking as you highlight what you love about them.
Well, thank you for asking that question. It's something that I think we should all think about more often. about the people we love. Just, what are their top qualities? What do you appreciate about them? So thank you for asking.
Well, we are here on the Strong Life Coach podcast. I'm here with Hervé Fleurant. We're talking about international influence. So if you're listening, this is the podcast where we speak life, coach life, write life, and lead life. And if you're listening also, be sure to like the podcast, rate it well, comment on it, share it, and don't forget to subscribe. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me.